around the country and around the world. It's being described as the largest government intervention in private markets since the Great Depression. The Bush administration has asked Congress to swiftly approve a massive $700 billion package to rescue the crippled financial institutions on Wall Street. But congressional Democrats have begun to draw up their conditions for the proposed bailout bill. Their terms include limits on the salaries and severance packages of executives at firms participating in the bailout. They also call for increased assistance to distressed homeowners across the country and greater congressional oversight of the Treasury Department. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi warned against giving Wall Street a $700 billion blank check. The bailout plan was drawn up by Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson and would set up a fund that uses taxpayer money to buy out the bad debt on Wall Street. The plan would also give nearly unlimited powers to the Treasury Secretary. Meanwhile, the last two major investment banks, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, have changed their status from investment banks to bank holding companies. This change, approved by the Federal Reserve Sunday, allows them to create commercial banks and also gives them access to the Fed's emergency loans.
Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press Sunday, Paulson admitted he was humbled by the crisis, but added Americans would, quote, work through this.
Well, what I would say is I won't bet against the American people. We're an entrepreneurial people, a hardworking people, and we will work through this. We always do. I wouldn't bet against the American people, and I wouldn't bet against the long-term fundamentals of this country. But this is a humbling experience to see so much fragility in our capital markets and to ask, how did we ever get here?
President Bush defended the Treasury's rescue plan Saturday, arguing it shielded, quote, average citizens from the crisis.
Yeah, this is a big price tag because it's a big problem, Mike. I told our people I don't want to be timid in the face of a significant problem that will affect the average citizen. You know, some said, well, we could contain this to just the financial community. In my judgment, based upon the advice of a lot of people who know how markets work, this wasn't going to be contained to just the financial community. This problem would spread to the average citizen. You know, you hear them talking about Wall Street and Main Street. Well, this is Wall Street plus Main Street, and I'm worried about Main Street.
The Democratic and Republican presidential nominees also addressed the financial meltdown from the campaign trail. On Friday, Senator Obama said he supported efforts by the Treasury and the Federal Reserve to work out a rescue package.
Today, I fully support the efforts of Secretary Paulson and Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke to work in a bipartisan spirit with Congress to find a solution of this sort. What we're looking at right now is to provide the Treasury and the Federal Reserve with as broad authority as is necessary to stabilize markets and to maintain credit.
Meanwhile, Senator McCain promised supporters in Green Bay, Wisconsin Friday he would bring changes to help regulate Wall Street.
To deal with the immediate crisis, I will lead in the creation of the Mortgage and Financial Institutions Trust, the MFI. The underlying principle of the MFI, or any approach considered by Congress, should be to keep people in their homes and safeguard the life savings of all Americans by protecting our financial system and capital markets.
In a moment, we'll be joined by one of the senators who will be voting on the legislation, the independent senator of Vermont, Bernie Sanders. But we turn now to two other guests. Dean Baker is an economist and co-director of the Washington, D.C.-based Center for Economic and Policy Research, frequent contributor and columnist. His blog is Beat the Press. He's the author of several books, including The United States Since 1980 and The Conservative Nanny State, How the Wealthy Use the Government to Stay Rich and Get Richer. He joins us from Washington, D.C. And we're joined by Robert Scheer in Los Angeles, California, veteran journalist, syndicated columnist at San Francisco Chronicle, editor of the political website Truthdig. He's the author of several books, most recently The Pornography of Power, How Defense Hawks Hijacked 9/11 and Weakened America. Dean Baker, let's start with you. Explain the legislation that is being introduced.
Well, essentially what the president's asked for is a $700 billion blank check. He wants Congress to hand over $700 billion to Henry Paulson to use to buy, bad, originally mortgage-backed securities. There's apparently an effort by the financial community to broaden that, but basically he would have a blank check to bail out Wall Street. And let me just make one point that everyone should be very, very clear on. This was not an accident in the sense that this is like a hurricane. This was a totally predictable event. So when President Bush or Henry Paulson say, we have to come to the rescue, it is because of their incompetence, because people who understood the economy, I'm putting myself among those, but there are others, we were warning about this a long, long time ago. This was a totally predictable event that brought us here.
And Dean Baker, in terms of what it would cover, even the White House apparently keeps changing it. By late Saturday night, they were talking also about the possibility of bailing out foreign banks that had invested in instruments in the United States, as well as moving beyond just securities backed by home mortgage loans, but also to other types of debt as well.
Absolutely, and this speaks to the nature of the bailout. The bailout should not be fun if it's constructed right. The way this should be constructed is if you're on the edge of bankruptcy, you come to the Treasury and you get the money, but guess what? You're selling your company. And you also have serious limits on CEO pay. You only get $2 million a year. How's that? Or maybe less. Some people have proposed less than that. But the bailout has to be punitive if it's serious. It shouldn't be a field day. We shouldn't have people lining up to get in. That's telling us that this is not a serious bailout. So the idea that the administration proposing is that the people who were engaged in incredibly reckless behavior, who made out like bandits getting tens of millions of dollars in salary and compensation over the last few years, are now going to get this $700 billion blank check from the American taxpayer. It's just unbelievable.
Robert Scheer, I'd like you to weigh in here. Actually, when hearing Henry Paulson questioned by George Stephanopoulos on ABC yesterday, the Treasury Secretary said, we don't want this to be punitive. We've got to basically save the country, he said.
Well, in the clips you played, these people just lied through their teeth. I mean, Bush, who after all knows about the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, because
we're going to have to, Robert, we're going to have to fix your sound. I'll put that question to Dean Baker while we correct that. Dean.
Yeah, well, as I said, this is really just an incredible. We want it to be punitive. If Henry Paulson doesn't want it to be punitive, that's telling us from the word go, he is not the guy to run this. This is not supposed to be a giveaway. These are the richest people in the whole country. And if it's not punitive, what we're telling them is just, go out, run your banks in a reckless manner, because that's what they did. They wouldn't be here if they didn't run their banks in a reckless manner. Pay yourself 30, 40, 50 million a year in compensation. Then when you get in trouble, go running to the government, and we'll just hand you hundreds of billions and more. If this isn't punitive, if this isn't really painful for them to come to the government, then we've messed up with the bailout. They don't have to do it. Again, if your business is good, if you could get by without the bailout, wonderful. Don't come talk to us. You don't need the money. But if you're going to get a handout, it's going to be punitive. That's the way it's supposed to be.
And what were some of the major mistakes or flaws in how these investment companies and banks dealt with this crisis back now? Because we've been knowing that this has been building in the heartland now for a couple of years.
Well, we've been knowing since 6 years. The basic story was we had a housing bubble, which, again, these people are supposed to be smart. They're paid tens of millions of dollars. They should have recognized the housing bubble. They should have recognized that house prices would fall, as they have been. And what that meant was you made a loan on a house for $250,000, $300,000, $400,000. That house price was likely to fall. So if you did that with zero down, as many of them did, plus having mortgages, the predatory mortgages, the subprime mortgages that have got them in particular trouble, these were guaranteed to go bad in many cases. They acted as though house prices would just keep going up forever and they could just keep, going along these lines. They leveraged themselves to the hilt. The investment banks like Lehman and Bear Stearns leveraged themselves to ratio 30 to 1. In other words, if they had $10 billion in capital, they had loans on the order of $300 billion. I mean, this was just asking for disaster. And, again, it did collapse. It was totally predictable it would collapse. You know, I didn't know when, didn't know exactly who, but it was totally predictable. And now they're running to us and asking us for handouts. Think of what we do to welfare people when they, you know, everything they have to go through to get, you know, $500 a month check. And these people want billions, no questions asked. Unbelievable.
Robert Scheer, let's try again in Los Angeles. Your analysis is what has happened, and if you could bring into the history of what took place, those words we almost never hear on television, Glass-Steagall.
Hello?
Hi, can you hear us?
Can they hear me?
Yeah, we hear you just fine. Well, we're going to go to a break. We'll fix this problem, and we'll come right back. Robert Scheer, veteran journalist, also with us. Dean Baker, who is director of the Washington, D.C.-based Center for Economic and Policy Research. We'll be back in a minute.